Shalom. Shalom. I'm honored to be a part of this panel. For this section, we are going to use our book, Mirrored Reflections, as a launching pad to generate more discussions about Asian American hermeneutics. And in case some of you don't know, the word hermeneutics is a fancy word for interpretation. I'm going to address two questions. The first question comes in two parts. What is Asian American hermeneutics, and how would the Academy benefit from this approach? And the second question I'm going to address is, how does yin and yang serve as one of the Asian American interpretation models? Since we've been talking about telling stories yesterday, I would like to start by telling you a story. I grew up in an atheist home. I've never been to church until I was a freshman in college. When I was a new Christian, I was on fire for Jesus. I was like what Paul said, I counted all things but rubbish so that I may gain Christ. Back then, I wasn't thinking about ethnicity or race. I was thinking about the world in general. As a newborn Christian, I was black and white in my thinking, and I could not tolerate anything imperfect at my church. There was this one Christian brother at my church who was actively serving. At the same time, he was sleeping with his non-Christian girlfriend. A lot of people at church knew about it, including the pastor. But the pastor did not do anything about the situation and still allowed this brother to serve actively at church. So one day, I confronted my pastor. I shared about my frustration with him, and I was expecting him to do something about the situation. As a result of that meeting, he took it very badly. The next thing I knew, my pastor started to use the pulpit to target me as his enemy. In a series of sermons, he used the adulterous women in John 8, and he asked the congregation, who are we to throw a stone at another sinner? Shouldn't we be more compassionate? He also spoke badly about me in front of other church members and verbally abusive in private towards me. As a newborn Christian, I was traumatized by the experience. I was silenced by the experience. Have you ever been silenced by an authority figure in your life? Or have you ever experienced the consequence of your voice or your silence in your ministry setting? When we read a biblical story, we're not only concerned with what is behind the text and what is in the text, we also bring in our own story to the text. Our personal experience, our social location, ethnicity, gender affect how we read the Bible. And for our book, Mirrored Reflections, I chose the character Bathsheba because my own story mirrors hers on different levels. And no, I did not bathe on the rooftop. I identify with her in other ways. Bathsheba was a silent victim at first, and then she transforms into a vocal mother, helping her son to become the king of Israel and Judah. Likewise, I was silenced by my former pastor. And I also grew up with an authoritative father. And so I identify with Bathsheba's silence. I'm also a mother, and I resonate with Bathsheba's motherly protectiveness. There is another thing Bathsheba and I are in common. My son's name and her son's name are the same. My son's name is Jedediah, the same name that Pastor Eugene Cho's son, which is the same name for Bathsheba's son, Solomon. That's his other name. I did not want to call my son Jedi because I don't want to feel like I'm Yoda's mom. So we call him Jed. But anyways, Bathsheba's story uncovers part of me that I did not permit myself to own, my voice. That was my lost coin. As I unfold my own story, it intersects with Bathsheba's story. And therefore, there is a two-way relationship in the interpretation process, the meaning of the text and what I bring into the text. As a result of this two-way relationship, there is intersection and interaction between text and context. And in this process of text and context, new meaning emerge. Asian American hermeneutics is a form of contextualized hermeneutics. Asian American, by definition, involves two elements, the Asian and the American. According to Andrew Lee, Asian American hermeneutics is rooted in an ethnic theology that is neither Western nor purely Asian in orientation, but a synthesis of these two modes of thinking. As Asian Americans, when we read a biblical story, we would ask questions pertaining to our interests, such as, which story parallels my own? Which story or character do I identify or resonate with? Which characters does the narrator cast as others? And how does their difference affect their access to power and their ability to have a voice? Which story or character give me hope as an ethnic minority or double minority? And where is God in the picture? According to Andrew Lee, there are other issues pertaining to Asian American hermeneutics. There are marginality and liminality, inclusiveness, suffering and sacrifice, pilgrimage versus materialism, corporate versus individual thinking, law versus grace. And I wish to add another category to the list: Asian American women and those who are partially Asian Americans, such as the Hapas and the TCKs. Asian American hermeneutics is an ongoing process. It is not fixed, it is not set. It is dynamic and fluid, because as the context of the reader changes, so does the appropriation of the text. This mode of interpretation gives voice to the powerless and the voiceless. At the same time, it provides a venue to re-examine the mainstream teachings of the Bible. I was trying to think of an analogy to describe the relationship between Asian American hermeneutics and mainstream Western historical critical interpretation. And last night I thought of one. Asian American hermeneutics is like the Minority Report that challenges, critiques, and offers a different perspective to the mainstream teachings of the Bible. And all of us as Asian Americans, as ethnic minorities in this country, we all have a minority report. The second question I'm going to address is, how does yin and yang serve as one of the Asian American interpretation models? I was talking to a friend of mine this past week, and she said something that's both funny and shocking to me. We were talking about another friend of ours who is a male. We were not doing any gossiping, it was just women talk. And this friend of mine said, he, meaning our friend, he is like a woman, and you, meaning me, is like a man. When I heard that, I went, what? What are you talking about? What do you mean? I'm like a man? She smiled and said, I mean, in terms of your determination, you're like a man. And I went, oh, that's right. What she said about me captures a glimpse of the idea of yin and yang. In ancient Asian cultures, yin refers to the female energy, and yang refers to the male energy. Outwardly, I'm a yin person. The way I talk, the way I carry myself, the way I dress. But inwardly, I have this yang energy. I'm determined, persistent, resilient. But it doesn't mean that I'm a man inside. I still have this yin side inside of me. For example, I'm compassionate and gentle and all that. Okay. And so I'm a combination of yin and yang. And all of us, in one way or another, are combinations of yin and yang. I think Yang will talk more about that. Okay. So as we mentioned earlier, inclusiveness is one of the issues in Asian American hermeneutics. Inclusiveness is both and, as opposed to the Western thinking of either or. And since yin and yang thinks in terms of both and, it fits well with Asian American mode of thinking. In our book, Mirrored Reflections, we use yin and yang as a lens to reflect on the biblical characters we chose. We purposely chose the characters who are in pairs with the other characters. For example, Esther and Vashti, Mary and Martha, Elizabeth and Mary, Priscilla and Aquila. Whether it's about submission and rebellion, serving others and self-care, competition and complement, each pair reflects the dynamics of yin and yang. And even for the single characters who are not in pair with another character, the idea of yin and yang is present throughout. Take Bathsheba, for example. One application of her story to me is about finding balance between voice and silence. And I use the lamb and the lioness as metaphors for two extreme types of women in leadership, the silent and the vocal. And the point for me is not to be either the silent one or the vocal one, but to be both, depending on the context. And that captures the essence of yin and yang. I'm going to give the time over to Debbie.